It's a pleasure to welcome everyone here tonight to a very special evening, an occasion which is certainly unique for us and at Kesher, and I think in many ways unique within our communal context. We have two outstanding speakers tonight, and it's my honor to be able to introduce them very shortly. I just have a few introductory comments. Firstly, welcome to everyone, and I want to especially acknowledge and to thank the Simon Wiesenthal Center in the UK, and especially its chairman, my good friend Mr. Graham Morris, who's here in the front row. I should mention also the presence of Ruthie Morris. We don't see her that frequently anymore. She's not quite as mobile as she once was, but it's a pleasure to see you with us, Ruthie.
Thank you.
I also want to thank Stefan Bialaguski, who in the background has had a very important role in assisting with the success of the program tonight. I also want to thank the CST volunteers and the members of the Kesher Kehila who have assisted with security arrangements. To be honest, this is the first time that we've had a program here at Kesher where I felt there could be a need, especially for security considerations. I'm pleased to see that I don't believe that peril has threatened us, but one can never be certain. And in that context, I just want to say about the decorum, even though, as I say, I'm looking around, they're all very sympathetic faces here, but it did occur to us there may be hecklers, conceivably. We don't expect decorum to be a problem. At Kesher, we don't even talk during Chazar Hashatz. But nevertheless, I just want to say that if you have questions or comments, even of a critical nature, you will have an opportunity to share them at an appropriate juncture after the speakers have had an opportunity to share with us their thoughts and their presentation tonight. In a few weeks' time, we will read in the Parsha, Hen Am Levadad Yishkon, a nation that dwells alone. Bilam, the villainous heathen prophet, blessed the Jewish people with that designation, the nation that dwells alone. And this captures, in a few words, the Jewish self-concept over hundreds of years of exile. We have the famous vivid imagery, which is especially opposite for our speaker tonight. The image of a lamb that is surrounded by 70 wolves, in which the Jewish nation is that lamb. And the wolves are the nations, the 70 nations of the world. And how great is the shepherd who protects the lamb, although it is menaced by so many carnivorous neighbors. And I have to say that to a certain extent, we Jews have suffered from that imagery, from that metaphor. And I have to say that too often it has indeed been so, that our enemies appear to nearly overwhelm us, and we marvel at our own survival from generation to generation. And because of that, we have become maybe a little bit too introspective, a little bit too insular, and we have possibly absorbed some of that siege mentality and the presumption that everyone is against us. I'm reminded of the young American boy who came home one day very excited in the 1930s, and he said, Zayda, did you hear the news? He said, what's the news? He said, Babe Ruth hit a home run in the bottom of the ninth, and the Yankees won 5-4. So the Zayda strokes his beard and he says, tell me, Zokma Yingala. He says, what this Babe Ruth did, is it good for the Jews? This kind of attitude in which our concerns are limited to the survival of the Jewish people, and to a certain extent, our presumption has been that if we are not our own advocates, and if we do not erect a kind of insular wall around ourselves, then we are doomed. And I would like to say that, thank God, despite the vicissitudes of the 20th century, and despite what we read in the press, we have many friends, and the justice of the cause of the State of Israel, I believe, is recognized and can be recognized widely. It is true that there are forces arrayed against us, but I think we do ourselves a disservice when we assume that really everybody seeks our downfall and everyone secretly harbors great animosity towards us. We're honored to have with us tonight two notable advocates for Israel. One, a distinguished member of the Israeli Diplomatic Corps, another an energetic political activist from Birmingham. Both are passionate in the justice of Israel's cause and have shown themselves willing to stand up and be counted despite the presumption of hostility towards Jews and the Jewish state, which many Muslims profess. Kesher means connection, and our purpose over the years has been to promote a connection among Jews, between Jews and their heritage, and ultimately between us and Hashem. And yet there are other connections that we need to make as well, the connection of alliances, and I hesitate to use the word coalition at this juncture in British political landscape, but that as well. And as I said a moment ago, we do have and we can seek out friends in unexpected quarters. And tonight, I think, is a vote against the presumption that everyone is against us. As the late former President Nixon said, or was said of him, just because you're neurotic doesn't mean that everyone is not against you. And so although I think, again, we have good reason for concern about the attitude of the nations of the world towards us, at the same time, I don't want to carry that too far, and as I said, tonight is a note against that. I'd like to just say a few words about our speakers tonight, and I'll talk about each of them in turn. Ishmael Khaldi is a distinguished diplomat. You know the difference between a diplomat and a woman. You know? If a diplomat says yes, he means maybe. If he says maybe, he means no. And if he says no, he's not a diplomat. Now, a lady, if she says no, she means maybe. If she says maybe, she means yes. If she says yes, she's not a lady. If you didn't hear that. Ishmael Khaldi served in the Israel Defense Forces and the Israel Border Police before joining the Ministry of Defense and finally the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He served as Deputy Consul in San Francisco for 3 years before being invited to become policy advisor to the Foreign Minister Avigdor Lieberman. He was born 35 years ago in, I can't quite pronounce it, Khaldi. I'm sure he'll tell us the right way to pronounce his hometown. Yeah? Okay. A small Bedouin village in the Galil. He is the third child of 11 children. His father worked in pharmacopoeia, and as a child, Ishmael used to accompany his father during school vacations. Like other children in the village, he walked several miles to school every day. Until the age of 8, I can barely get my children to walk from the house to the car to go to school. Until the age of 8, he lived with his parents in a tent because the village was not yet recognized by the Israeli government and did not have running water or electricity. We're not talking about the 19th century, we're talking about a young person, probably 30 years ago. When he completed elementary school, he wanted to study in a private Christian school in Haifa where the children of Israel's Arab elite attend. He got to school by hitchhiking, buses, and of course walking. After finishing his BA, he volunteered for the border police, and following his discharge, he was accepted for an MA in International Relations at Tel Aviv University. If I can mention another baseball analogy, we could say that Ishmael is the Jackie Robinson of the Israeli Diplomatic Corps. Are there any Americans here? No, that's a clunker. Not a single one. Okay, that was a clunker. Jackie Robinson was, since I mentioned it, I've got to explain it, a bit like the Torah reading, I've got to have a comment on it. Since I mentioned it, Jackie Robinson was the first black American to play in the major leagues. And he was an outstandingly talented baseball player, and that is the only way that he succeeded, because the animus against him and the prejudice was so profound that it had to be a person of extraordinary talent to be the one to break the color barrier. And Ishmael's success within the Israeli Diplomatic Corps is a tribute to his outstanding qualities. I don't want to tell you more about him, you'd rather hear from the man himself. So it's a pleasure for me to welcome Ishmael Khaldi from Untitled Chapter to Israeli Diplomat.
Shalom. Thank you very much, Rabbi Simon. It's a pleasure for me to be with you here. Look, I won't speak, for long. I'll make my talk very short and depend more on your questions and anything that you want to know. That's from my experience. You didn't continue the sentence. And I can't, I'm sorry. Am livadad yishkon u'bagoyim lo yitchashav. Try to imagine a goy from Israel is according to 14 Torah. It's not just am livadad yishkon u'bagoyim
Lo yitchashav.
Okay, in any case, I will
Can you
leave
translate?
that.
Sorry.
No, you translate. Again, I want to thank you very much, and thanks to Graham, my good friend Graham Morris from the Weisenthal Center, but also my new family here in London. Edwin Sugar, I'm just excited because try to imagine thousands of miles away in a day and a half I'm finding a friend who's becoming a family, not living even me for even a minute. Edwin Sugar and his family, thank you very much. He's sitting all the way in the back, but thank you. Look, again I said I won't talk much. I won't speak as the advisor and a diplomat and so on, even though this is my title. But I will speak as an Israeli, Israeli citizen. January 25th, if you remember, and February 17th were very important dates in the history of the modern history, let me say, of the Middle East. Anybody knows what happened there? No. The Tahrir Square in Cairo, in a sudden was full with people who, stood up, spoke up, in order to stop, what was happening there, the regime, Mubarak, after 31 years. It happened more or less the same thing on February 17th in Libya, later in Syria, and of course in Yemen. I've been reading since then, following the news from there, what's happening, reading the newspapers every morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, like reading the news from Syria, from Lebanon, from the Maghreb, Tunisia and Morocco, and so on, and Egypt, and trying to understand what's happening there, what's going on. Because, after all, I'm not just an Israeli diplomat, Israeli citizen, but I have, a role to understand what's really going on, what's happening, what we can do, what we should do, what we need to do as Israel. And someone like myself, and I'm coming forth with a story, what can I do? What is my contribution? I'm not a typical Israeli diplomat, typical Israeli bureaucrat. No, more than this. And as someone who's coming from this culture, someone who's coming from this, background, Arab culture, the message is very clear for me. And the message is that people in those countries want to live like me. People want to live like yourself, in a democracy, in open societies. And feel like people who are living in Sweden, like people who are living in America. But again, above everything, like people like myself, Israelis. The only democracy in the Middle East. Now nobody knows, of course I'll come again later with the story. Ask me any question that you want. But not that Israel is a perfect country. And Israel is, the best place in the world. For me it is. Because if you look at Israel, you celebrated 63 years of independence in about a month ago. I think what Israel have done and Israel have accomplished and achieved in 63 years of independence can be an example for the entire Western world. More than America, more than this Great Britain, more than Sweden, more than all of the Western democratic countries. Only 63 years of independence. I'm not speaking about the technology, high tech. I'm not speaking about the medical innovations. I'm not speaking about the alternative energy, developments and so on and so on. Israel in those fields is a world leader, more than most of the any Western countries. But the achievement I'm proud of, and that's what really makes me proud to be part of, is how Israel is treating minorities. Remember, Israel, the Jewish state, Israel is the homeland for Jewish people. But how it treats its minority, a democracy, where Muslims and Christians and Druze and Baha'is can live like everybody else. I think this is the best, this is the best example that we can use, and we can, stand up to be proud of it. Now again, I will continue with Sarah. I will come back to this, to those points. But I want to tell that, it reminds me of the story that happened to me in December 2006. Anybody knows what happened in 2006, December? Very important. Israel sending the first Bedouin diplomat to San Francisco. That's a joke. I tell you why. Because trying to do it is a joke. But in December 2006, I was assigned. I arrived to San Francisco, one of the most politically opinionated places on earth, besides Israel, of course, to be an Israeli, deputy consul general, represent Israel in the northwest of America, representing the Arabs, representing the Jews, representing the Muslims, the Christians, the right, the left, the whole, fakakta, as they say in Yiddish. It's Israel. And by the way, this is the beauty of the country. It's a multicultural society, multilingual society, multi-religious society. The most diverse countries on the face of earth, I think, more even than this country. Very small. And I am arriving there. And 3 weeks after, I'm arriving with full of excitement. Because I have, full of expectations and responsibility on my shoulders. And I have to be the best. I cannot allow myself to be another diplomat. And 3 weeks after I'm arriving, I'm being asked by an 87 years old Jewish woman, asking me one of the toughest questions in my adult life. She stood up and asked me, how come, first of all, is that possible? Tell us, how does it come that you are a Muslim representing Israel, Jewish state? She was Jewish. And the second part of the question was, how do you feel if you were sent? She said sent, not assigned, and not appointed, but sent thousands of miles away from your family, from your village, to advocate for Israel's equality, for Israel's democracy, while back home among your brothers and sisters, you're not entitled to this kind of democracy, to this kind of equality. To be honest with you, it was very touching, because if you look at it and start to dig, it's very hard. Is Israel, perfect country? It's not a perfect country. And that's what I told her. That was the instinct. I said Israel is not perfect. Like, America, like, this country, like other countries in the West. No, we are not. We have our own issues. So many problems to deal with. Deep inside, do we have discrimination? There is discrimination in Israel against minorities, ethnic minorities, and, other minorities. But of course I had to start, I started to tell her about myself. That yes, I grew up, and I'll tell you the story in 3 minutes. Growing up as a third of 11 brothers and sisters in little village, in a tent until 8 years old. But of course I told her that Israel is Jewish state, but 20% of the population are not Jews. 20% of the Israeli population. The Jews are Arabs, Muslims, Christians, Druze, Cherkessians, and Baha'is. And that's the beauty of the country. But the practice freedom of religion, of faith, like everybody else. More than this, I continue the story about myself. Growing up in a tent until 8 years old, having no electricity, having no running water even. You mentioned Jack Rocks, whatever that, always that.
Jack
Rocks. I'm not competing with others. But the equal opportunity I was given to go for university, to go for college, to be able to join the government, join the diplomatic corps until 6 years ago. That is the best example, I think, where a person is being judged not because his color is based on his color, his religion. and his, let me say, culture and background. No, about his, based on his, you are judged based on your talents and your skills and your ability, but above everything, about you, like based on your motivation. If you are ready to come and contribute and do and give you your part, the skies are the limits, as we say, we used to say in the military. And of course, when I finished high school, we had to walk. We have no electricity, no running water. I'm getting more nervous because it's very tough. It's very touching. And seeing a mother of 11 kids waking up every morning, 4 o'clock every morning, to make laundry and to make food, feed 11 kids, 12 kids, with my father, and to school every morning. No, try to imagine, it's cruel. And at the end of the day, we are hopeful. We are part of this, the country. Nobody complained that we are discriminated against, and nobody complained that we are second-class citizens and so on and so on. This is our culture. We are shepherd society, more or less. I think can compare us to the American natives in the States, Aboriginals in Australia, and so on. It's a cultural transition. We are moving from being shepherd society into more modern, civilized, if you want. Okay, settled, organized society, more educated, and this is what happened. And we are still changing. As a result, of course, I told my friend Sue. The whole story. I decided to write a book, it's a very short autobiography. There will be a sequel for it. Okay, and, I called it the shepherd journey, telling the whole story from being a boy, a shepherd boy in the village, until today. And of course, I told her about the Arab community, the entire Arab community. My story goes longer because after finishing elementary school, we had to walk about 3 kilometers every day to the elementary school in another village. Coming back, try to imagine 6 kilometers every day walking. But since then, I swore that I will never live, let me say, a easier life than my mother. Until today, I forced myself 4 o'clock woke up, reading the newspapers. As I told you before, going to run 4:30 every single morning. Finishing elementary school, I went to the best high school for the Arabs in Israel, in Haifa. Later, I went to work in Kibbutz Kfar Maccabi nearby. And later I came first to the States, to America, went to America for about 3 weeks. 3 months, I'm sorry, going back to Israel, going for a bachelor's degree in political science, master's degree in international relations, Tel Aviv University, serving with Israeli border police, working for the American embassy in Tel Aviv, serving in the Shin Bet for, the Shin Bet, the Israeli Secret Service for 3 years until 6 years ago, to be Israeli diplomat. Because I decided, I have a right, I have an ability, and of course I have the motivation to represent my country. So what if my color is different? So what if my language is different? So what if my culture and background is different? So what if I grew up in almost nothing, in a tent? People judge me, and this is the beauty of of course the Jewish state, but of an equal opportunity that is given for every citizen. No matter if you are kibbutznik, you are Chabadnik, you are religious, secular, right, left, Bedouin, Arab, Muslim, Christian, you have the pure intention, you want to contribute to this society, diverse society. We say, adelante, as they say in Spanish. The skies are the limit. And this is what I decided to do. After 3 attempts, the second attempt, third attempt, of course I was accepted. Nobody took me from the village, said, okay, you're going to be the Bedouin first diplomat. No, I had to go through this selection process. Exams, 1 time, 2nd time, the 3rd time I went through. And that's what happened, but I continue with the story, telling my friend, she is 92 years old today. I told her that the Israeli the Bedouins are of course two parts. Everything is here, by the way. I'm not going to tell you the whole story, but the Israeli Arabs, even though they are a minority in Israel, in the Jewish state, they are an Arab minority. They are sharing the same culture and religion, language with Israel's enemies. Okay, let me put it this way: the Palestinians, the Syrians, the Lebanese, Jordanians, Egyptians, they are living in a very sensitive situation. I don't think there is another community in the entire world, a minority in the entire world that lives in this status of Israeli Arabs. On one side you are living in the country, which is considered as Jewish state. Okay, so what about me then? And of course Hatikva, speaking only about aspiration of Jewish people. Does it speak to me? Does it talk to me? The national anthem in America speaks to America's citizens, no matter what their background is. But here, it's different. The national anthem is speaking only about Jewish aspiration. So what about the Arabs? What do they feel? And nobody can blame them. Israeli Arabs. On the other side, of course, their brothers and sisters are the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza, are the Jordanians, the Egyptians, the Syrians, the Lebanese, the Iraqis. It's very complex, it's not black and white. But I think, that living in a democracy, the only democracy in the Middle East, they have the right to vote, they have the right to vote. They can be, elected for the Knesset. Yes, we have 14 Knesset members. In the Arab Knesset members in the Knesset. Israeli Arabs are holding, leading positions in Israeli academia, in Israeli scientific institutions. Machon Weizmann, the Technion. Israeli Arab doctors are holding, leading positions in Israeli hospitals. Go to Nahariya. I like to use this example always. Nahariya Hospital in the north, government hospital in the Western Galil. The head of the school, the head of the hospital is an Arab. Most of the doctors, my friends, are Arabs. Most of the nurses are Arab. But more than anything, that's what really warmed my heart, is most of the girls who are just graduated from high school, who comes for Shirut Leumi or national service, or civil service, are Arabs, not Jews even. In Israel, the military service is compulsory. You have to serve when you get 18 years old. But if you are religious, you can do military service or national service, as they call it. Because the young generation of the Arab community is changing. They are much more aware, much more awake about about their status and their position as part of Israel. They know, okay, they have relatives maybe in Syria and Lebanon and you say Gaza, I don't know, in Ramallah. But they are living in a Jew. Israel is their country. Israel is the place they grew up in. They are, were educated in. In the last 7 years, I would say. Now, I'm not speaking again about the Bedouins and the Druze because we are a minority within that minority, within the Arab minority. Our story is totally different. But after high school, in the last 7 years, in the last, and the numbers are growing. Go to the Arab villages, especially in the north. After high school, Israeli Arab girls are committing themselves for 1 year, 2 years of national service, serving in Nahariya Hospital, serving in community centers. Because the aliyut, or the responsibility for each other, is a basic value. And this is the beauty of Israel. That's what makes us, proud citizens of this land of democracy. So that was the story. And by the way, right, people are speaking about women's rights. Go to Saudi Arabia. Go to other countries in the Middle East, Kuwait. Women have no right. Women have no right. No, there's no right. The first woman Muslim woman to be ordained as a judge in the entire Middle East. Wasn't in Egypt, wasn't in Tehran, and of course not in Kuwait and Saudi Arabia and others. Now I'm not criticizing, I'm just telling you where Israel is giving an opportunity to everybody, okay, to perform. Prove yourself. The first Muslim woman to be a judge, ordained, I think that's the word, was in Israel. Now we have a second one. In March, we have another one who was ordained. You know, she's a judge, and she is Muslim. So the situation of the Arab minority in Israel, their situation in education, in anything, if you want, is much far better than any other minority in the Middle East. So I continued with the whole story with my friend Sue in San Francisco. I spent 2.5 years in San Francisco. It was a very tough experience. I tried to write about it here. Very, very tough. And because I found, to be a diplomat today is not, I don't know if you know what it means to be a diplomat, to represent your country. It's not going for events and cocktails and good life and have nice. That is one thing. But also, being away from the family, you have to. It's challenging. Now, to be honest with you, again, I want to talk from the top of my heart, or the bottom of my heart. To be an Israeli diplomat today is very, very, very challenging. Very, very challenging. I have tried to think and imagine what does it mean to be an Israeli and Bedouin and Muslim diplomat. Sometimes it's impossible. But it is possible. 2.5 years in San Francisco taught me a lot about myself, about the country, but you know what? About America, about the entire world, Western world, where people who have no idea almost about their own history, about their own country, they judge a country which is thousands of miles away from them. I was going sometimes to University of California in Berkeley, one of the finest educational institutions in the world. Speaking to Middle Eastern studies, students who are going for a master's degree, like MA. Speaking about Israel, about the Middle East, the professor who was in a debate with me didn't want to shake my hand. Didn't want to say my name even. He didn't want to say the name Israel. Only Jewish state, Hebrew state. He, the other speaker. Is that respect? And I'm coming from a culture which is maybe primitive, whatever you want to call it. But those are basic human values. Basic human values. Respect. Even when my enemy, he points a hand to shake my hand, I will shake his hand. I may not agree with his views. I may not accept what he has to say. But to respect. I found no respect. I was telling people about Israel in California, about what Israel accomplished, what Israel, and so on and so on. I was asking them a very simple question. How many years America will be celebrating in the coming July 4th? That's Yom Ha'atzmaut, Independence Day. Do you think anybody knew? The answer was that we were looking at each other. You have no idea about when the Constitution was ratified in America. Anybody knew? Anybody knows what here? My friends, it's very embarrassing. But when it comes to Israel, they know everything. Yes, Israel is racist. Israel is an apartheid state. Israel is an oppressive. And I was standing proud time after time after time. You know what? I feel sad for them because they had no idea. Very smart, well educated. But when it comes to their own little body, it's very sad. And I think this is what fuels me to stand up time after time after time, to speak up and talk, because we have to educate. There is no other way. I think this is my moral responsibility, moral responsibility, to stand up and speak. I'm not doing any advocacy. I'm not doing any propaganda. People told me all the names that you try to imagine about or think about Israel. People really didn't know. Because we have to with your help, with your support, We have to reach everyone. People here in London, people in any corner in the world. Yes, we need friends. Israel needs friends. As a Jewish state or as multicultural state. And this is the image, the message that we're trying to to deliver. Israel wants to achieve peace with the Palestinians, with the Syrians, with the Lebanese, with the Jordanians. With Jordanian, of course, and Egyptians, we have peace agreements. We have embassies in both places. Some would call it like warm peace. Some would call it cold peace. But that's different, thing. Our arms are open. I, with my fellow Israeli, Bedouins, Arabs, Muslims, Christians in Israel, want to be a bridge of understanding. It's not easy, but we can. We want to do it. But our mission, our challenge is not the Arab world. Our challenge, my friends, again from the top or bottom. How do you say it?
Me'omek halev.
Deep from the heart. It's the people who have no idea about what's happening around their backyard. But when it comes to Israel, you have no idea. And I came here to this country in February, end of January last year, like earlier in the year. I went to a University of Edinburgh. And you have no idea. I'm not going to tell you the story. Just go do YouTube and see what happened. And people are speaking about freedom of expression or freedom of speech. They didn't let me even complete 2 sentences. Here in this country, in Great Britain, up in the University of Edinburgh, I went to Hull. People were shouting and screaming, but I spoke. I managed it with them. But the relations between between countries are not based only on governments. Your Prime Minister of Cameroon and our Prime Minister, your government and our government can manage with each other easily. But the relations are based on us also. Simple people like myself who grew up as shepherds, with people who are living here as farmers, as carpenters, if you want, but also professors. I have no idea, my friends. I have no idea why the UCU, or what do you call it, the college, boycotting it. Well, there's no problems in this country. There are no homeless people here. There are no hungry people to feed. Israel, leave the post. Don't agree with us. Handle your problems. So, that is a very, very sad thing. In any case, I finished my 2.5 years in San Francisco in April 2009, exactly 2 years ago, and to go back to Israel and be a policy advisor for our foreign minister. It was a month and a half after the elections in Israel. Prime Minister Netanyahu was elected as Prime Minister, Avigdor Lieberman as a foreign minister, and he called me. We knew each other before. I know him. He knew me from before. But it wasn't like a political appointment. I remember April 2009, the beginning of April, I'm receiving a phone call on Sunday morning after my finishing my run, and I said, okay, here it comes again, because the number showed that it's coming from Israel. Someone is calling me on Sunday morning from Israel. It's either an Israeli was arrested, and you have to start, ruin your vacation, your weekend, start dealing with it, or family. No, it was Avigdor Lieberman as a foreign minister asking me if I am fine, if I am good and ready to move. I said, of course, Bedouin, we are Bedouins, we can't, it's in our blood. I stayed too long, I had to come back, and then I decided to go back. In Israel also we are blessed with experts and advisors. Everybody knows everything. But I don't belong to any of them. And coming from the Middle Eastern Arab culture, okay, I understand more than many others, and everybody knows again. And I decided to take this position. But before taking this position, I went to meet with people in San Francisco, in the Bay Area where I serve. Arab professors who were in Berkeley, Arab professors who were from at San Francisco State, but also with George Shultz, if you know the name, used to be the Secretary of State in the beginning of the 80s. William Perry, Bill Perry, used to be the defense secretary in the first Clinton administration. Condoleezza Rice, if you remember, she used to be the secretary, right? Secretary of State, no. Secretary of State. What do they think? What are the things that we can do, we didn't do before, that we can do? Or someone like myself can bring as a contribution, we can move things, forward. And I wrote maybe about 2 pages, the Lieberman Khaldi, with me say, charming formula how to change the Middle East. In any case, I went back home. Beginning of July, I started my position. But you know what, my friends, it took me a week to understand that I have to calm down and relax. Not that you cannot change, but that in order to make a change, you need the readiness. Say the tango needs 2 sides, or one hand can't clap alone, you need the other side also to cooperate. I said before, and I'm saying again, Israel's open arms for peace, for reconciliation with its neighbors, since it was established, since 1948 until today. We had achieved, peace with Egypt. But you know what happened in Egypt when we did? 3 years or 4 years after Sadat was assassinated. We achieved peace, of course, with Jordan. With the Palestinians, we started a process, the peace process, 1993, September 1993, with the Oslo Accords. We had relations with Oman, with Qatar, with Tunisia, with Morocco. We have today with Mauritania, even though it's limping. And look what we have today. I say to the Palestinians, we want to see a 2-state solution. This is the official attitude of the Israeli government. Israel is saying we want to see a 2-state solution. Israel and Palestine, with the Palestinians. Israel and Palestine. We are ready to speak about the borders, right of return for refugees, and more settlements. But we need a responsible leadership on the other side. Look at what we have today. We have the Palestinians are split by themselves. Hamas in the West Bank and Gaza, and of course Fatah, the Palestinian Authority, Abu Mazen in Ramallah. So I am an Israeli citizen. I want to support my Prime Minister, my Foreign Minister, my Defense Minister. Sign an agreement with who? With Hamas? They are part of the Palestinian Authority, with the Palestinian people. With Abu Mazen? With who? This is a big problem. I think as long as the Palestinians themselves don't, agree on one leadership, one voice, it will be impossible to achieve an agreement. Impossible. I don't want to be like Job, Job. People bring you the bad news, but it will be impossible. Lebanon, again, I mentioned before, for Qatar, it's a mess since 1970s, going through a civil, clashes. I have no idea what will happen there. I don't think they themselves know where they are going. Syria, the same thing, what's happening right now in Syria. Egypt and Jordan, we have, peace, we have embassies in both places. But I think the big challenge, and I will finish here, the big challenge, my friends, for Israel and Israel's existence today is Iran. Iran, its nuclear attempts to achieve nuclear power. They are speaking about power. What's power? Power is natural gas. Power is oil. And Iran has enough oil and enough, believe me, natural gas that can be enough for this country for 200 years, maybe 300 years. So there is no urgency to develop, or to nuclear power. Ahmadinejad in 2005, when Ahmadinejad was elected the first time in 2005, the first thing he spoke about, what was that? Any guess? Anybody knows? in August. He used to be the mayor, of Tehran. The first thing he spoke about, a normal thing, a leader of the country, when he is elected, what do you think he would speak about? About the challenges facing, first of all, the internal front, health, education, employment. Ahmadinejad spoke about denying Holocaust. For him, there was no Holocaust. There were no other problems in the world, but for him, there was no Holocaust. He spoke about his dream of a Middle East, new Middle East, without Israel. For him, Israel is a cancer in the Middle East. Israel should be removed from the Middle East. He didn't speak about the fact that Iran is having, the highest rate of prostitution, brothel, I don't know what you call it here, in the entire world. Isn't that a social issue that he had to deal with? For him, no. It's like, okay, let's go, deal with other things. This is very sad. For us, the message is very clear. That, threatening us, threatening Israel, okay, that's kind of, what do you call it, on the wall, let's say, an address on the wall or something like that. What do you say? And he's talking to us. Writing on the wall. Look, Islam says clearly in Arabic, if anybody speaks Arabic, I'm not, to be honest with you, I'm not, I don't fast in Ramadan, I'm not a religious person, but my parents went to Mecca, to the Hajj, but the Quran, I grew up in the Quran, and it says clearly, I will say that in Arabic even, وَلَا تُجَادِلُوا أَهْلَ الْكِتَابِ إِلَّا بِالَّتِي هِيَ أَحْسَنُ. I think this is the best, quote I have from the Quran. وَلَا تُجَادِلُوا أَهْلَ الْكِتَابِ إِلَّا بِالَّتِي هِيَ أَحْسَنُ. Don't argue with people of the book. People of the book, the meaning was for the Jews and Christians, but by the best means. And what are the best means? Not supporting Hamas and Hezbollah with long and short range missiles and all kind of weapons, but by dialogue, peaceful talks. To be honest with you, first of all, I'm sorry? I'm finishing here. So to hear in the 2010, 2008, 9, 10, 11, my fellow Muslim, okay, and he's not just a carpenter, as I said before, president of the Islamic Republic of Iran. And Israel had no problem with Iran before. Until the end of the 70s, we have an embassy there. Okay? Calling for wiping Israel off the map. No, there was no Holocaust. That is, I think, something that humanity should not and will not tolerate. We all have to stand up and speak up together, shoulder to shoulder, hand in hand, to stop that from happening. Stop Iran from acquiring its nuclear power, in quotation mark. We cannot do this alone. We have to do it with you. People who are living here. Convince your officials in your country here. First of all, tell them about Israel. Instead of dealing with the UCU, making these sanctions and boycotting Israel, mixing academia with politics, mixing supermarkets to remove the products from Israel. Do you know how many? Again, I don't want to get into the details. That is a very bad and sad thing. Look, I can't speak a day long. Look, I continue from now. I also want to stop here and tell you that Israel will continue to flourish and prosper and lead the entire world in many things. We at the same time, facing so many challenges, still unfortunately fighting for its right to exist. But pointing hands or opening hands and arms for our neighbors, Palestinians, Syrians, Lebanese, whoever is ready to come and speak, come and talk, mutual respect, because this is what Israel represents. And again, this is my message here, is to tell people that the picture is totally different from what they think about us here in this country. If they would know exactly the real truth about Israel, and not to think like in a sudden that Hamas became Shalom Achshav. Unbelievable. Yes, Israel, would they want us to speak to Hamas? I know Hamas like the palm of my hand. Anybody knows what Hamas is? What Hamas charter is? When Hamas was established in this country? Israel, for them, Israel have to speak with Hamas. Go speak with Hamas and Al-Qaeda. Leave the issues for us. So thank you very much. Let's go for questions. We have questions.
Thank you very much, Ishmael, for an absolutely riveting presentation, and I'm sure that we have some questions which we'll address to you shortly. I want to give an opportunity, though, for our second speaker tonight to share with us some thoughts and to tell us a little bit about his perspective from that of a young person born and raised here in England, in the West Midlands, actually, in Dudley. Hasan Afzal is of Pakistani parentage, although he was born here. That's why his English is better than mine, as you've soon discovered. Hasan said that although he's of Muslim parentage, comes from a very modern family, a secular family. He didn't know what a burqa was until he saw one on BBC News. While a student of political economy at the University of Birmingham, however, Hasan has noticed that some Muslim friends and associates have been quick to adopt Arab-style clothes and hardline right-wing political views soon after joining the Islamic Society. And worried by his friends' retreat into cultural isolation and the campus's political discourse on Israel, which is poisonous out of all proportion with the Jewish state's actions, Hasan has co-founded the group Stand for Peace, which promotes human rights, moral clarity, and national discussion. With like-minded Muslim friends around the country, he went on to found an organization with the counterintuitive title of British Muslims for Israel, largely in a bid to protect the Muslim community from the self-inflicted harm caused by its one-sided and, in Hasan's view, delusional discourse on the Middle East. If you want to learn more about the British Muslims for Israel, you can find them with the help of that doughty political activist, Professor Google. I've been there myself. And also you can easily locate the video clip of Hasan's interview on Israeli television, in which the newscaster assures his viewers that Muslimim Brita'im Ba'ad Yisrael, he said, Zelo b'dicha. He needed to remind his listener, no, it's not a joke, there is such an entity, even in Britain. Hasan is currently on leave of absence from his studies in politics and economics, and he's working, as we said, with Stand for Peace. He describes himself as a critic of moral relativism and has provided us with a pithy soundbite pertinent to our subject for tonight. I don't know whether you remember saying this, Hasan, but I heard it from Stefan. You can't call yourself a middle-class liberal and wave a Hezbollah flag, which no doubt is very true. But Hasan can say so with greater authority than I, and so without further ado, it's a pleasure to call on him from Messianism to nationalism, how the Middle East conflict is sold to young Muslims.
Thank you to Rabbi Simon for hosting this evening, and thank you to Stefan for organizing this. I don't have long to speak, so I'll focus on my experience of the Middle East conflict on campus, and then I'll talk about my ambitions on founding British Muslims for Israel. 2 years ago, I began university. I was a university fresher, and many of my Muslim friends go on our own personal pilgrimage called Freshers Week. If anyone knows what that's about, it's basically a week of going out, partying, making new friends, getting adapted to so-called student life. which was great, and I met many friends. I met many Muslims, many Jews, many Christians, and many of my Muslim friends were just like us, liberal, secular. Really, we didn't really care about politics. We had a very apathetic point of view on the Middle East. I would say, very mainstream point of view on pretty much everything. And then last year, I found that many of my friends had joined the Islamic Society, which I hadn't joined because I sort of come from a secular background, and for me, my religion is not a personal journey, and this is not really for me. But many of my friends who joined the Islamic Society, I noticed a lot of changes in them, of which included, many of them began to harbour hardline views about the Middle East. These were people who didn't really care about the Middle East 6 months ago, and now they were talking about not just the two-state solution. They were talking about the fact that should Israel even exist. Many of them who also come from South Asian origin began wearing Arab clothing, despite the fact that they have no cultural heritage to the Arab world. Many of the girls started wearing burqas, despite the fact that it's not religious and it's nothing to do with South Asian culture. And many of the boys began to grow beards and shave their hair. Now, there's nothing wrong with growing beards and shaving your hair and making a burqa, but it's a little weird that just 3 weeks ago these kids were no different to as I say, you and I, and they would go to shopping malls and check out the latest fashions, and suddenly they've turned into very isolated, very angry individuals, which is very worrying for me. So I joined the Islamic Society, and I found that throughout my 2 years of university, and just a general point, that the Arab-Israeli conflict in the United Kingdom isn't really seen as an Arab-Israeli conflict anymore. It's seen as a false Muslim versus Jews conflict. The rhetoric, I would say the mainstream rhetoric in the Muslim community isn't the idea that there's Arab actors, Israeli actors, you have to get them in a room, negotiate, land swaps, etc. It's actually where Muslims have been victimized since the fall of the Ottoman Empire. God, isn't life horrible for us Muslims in the West? We have freedoms of speech here. And that against Jews. So it was Muslims versus Jews. And you can imagine what sort of person this would appeal to. It appeals to exactly the sort of Islamic extremist. It's exactly the sort of Islamic extremist rhetoric that recruiters of Islamic extremism latch onto. Because the moment you say the Arab-Israeli conflict is not to do with Arab Israelis, but actually it's to do with you, it's to do with Muslims and Jews, you actually open up so much more people can get involved with the conflict. And so I went to my first event of the Islamic Society, and the event was funny actually. The event was called I'm not making this up. The event was called A Lecture on Death. Once again, this had never ever been spoken about in my family. But anyway, I went along with it, and I thought this is Islamic Society. I get to learn more about my own religion. And the speaker who was there, who I later found out was actually a hate preacher, the first thing he showed was this video. It was a video in Gaza. It must have been about a year ago, and basically the video was of this F-16 fighter jet coming into Gaza, and there must have been some sort of reason to do this, but the F-16 fired a missile to a building, and there was no context. So basically we just got shown this video. F-16 comes in, fires this missile, and you can imagine the carnage. I mean, it's horrible to watch. Kids screaming, people crying. I mean, it was basically a snuff video. And that was at an Islamic society. You have to ask yourself, what on earth as an Islamic society you got to do with the Middle East conflict? But you also ask yourself, what on earth is an Islamic society showing this? And I think that what my experience was that many Islamic societies have become victim to the sort of Islamist rhetoric that is flourishing when people talk about the Arab-Israeli conflict. I think a lot of people have, especially in the Muslim community, have latched on to this idea that the Arab-Israeli conflict isn't just to do with Arab Israelis, it has to do with Muslims and Jews anywhere in the world. So whenever you meet a Jew in the world, treat him as your enemy. And which I find weird. I mean, something that I found, and I stayed in the Islamic Society for a year before taking a year out. There was nothing on other conflicts, nothing on the Kurdish fight for independence, nothing on our fellow Muslim brothers in Kurdistan fighting for a democratic state, nothing on the violence that Pakistani liberals have to face every day. In fact, there aren't many Pakistani liberals left because most of them end up dying. Nothing on the amazing progress that Iraq has made from going from a tyranny headed by an awful crime family to now what looks like to be one of the most flourishing developing democratic states in the Middle East. There was nothing on that. So as a result, this year, a couple of friends of mine and also just a couple of Muslims who we happen to know, we set up this group called British Muslims for Israel. And we found that what was happening in the Muslim community was people had stopped talking about the two-state solution. We've actually stopped talking about two-state solution a long time ago. And so what had happened was slowly people were actually bringing in delusional questions such as, should Israel even exist? No other country in the world gets that sort of treatment. Should Israel, I mean, no one talks about, let's say for example, should India exist? How silly is that question? Should the United States of America exist? Yet when people talk about should Israel exist, it's considered to be a fair point. It's considered to be, this is totally debatable, let's talk about this. Campus-based initiatives such as Stand for Peace exist to sort of at least bring in a human rights point of view on Israel. Because one thing that won't work in Britain that might work in the United States of America is that there's no appetite for Zionism on campus. If I went onto campus as an Israeli advocate and I shook someone's hand and he was a Palestinian supporter, and I said, hi, my name is Hasan Afzal, and did you know that Israel is a Jewish state and it's a place for Jews to live? It just wouldn't work. Because there's so much propaganda I'd have stuff thrown at me like it's an apartheid state, look what you're doing to the Palestinians, etc., etc. But one thing that does work, what we've found, is when you advocate for human rights, when you tell people that if you're a woman or a homosexual or a minority, it's in Israel that you most probably want to live in. It's in Israel where your rights are guaranteed. It's no other state in the Middle East provides minority rights like Israel. Then what you find is the people who are just there to support the so-called supporters of Palestine, once they realize the real face of the people who they're supposed to be advocating for, they soon turn away. And if I could just tell you a quick story, that soundbite where you can't be a liberal and wave a Hezbollah flag came from a rather vicious protest at the University of Birmingham, which I was there at. And there was a friend that I knew, and I would describe this person as your typical white, middle-class, liberal, Guardian reading student. Yeah? And I went up to him, and he was waving the Hezbollah flag. And I went up to him, and I said, what on earth do you think you're doing? You know, you're waving the Hezbollah flag. And he said, yeah, I'm waving the Hezbollah flag. These people just gave me a Hezbollah flag. I'm waving it. And I said, hold on a second. Do you know what that flag represents? And he said, yeah, it doesn't represent Palestine.
Peace now.
Yeah, peace. And I said, no, do you know about Hezbollah? Do you know its history? Do you know a guy called Hasan? Do you know what he says every Friday? And as soon as he found that out, he dropped the flag and he left. Right? That was exactly the response that we wanted. He was sickened, disgusted by it, and he left. I think that's exactly the sort of advocacy that's required on campus. And just on a wider level, anti-Israeli sentiment in Britain is really growing to the point where we've seen it affecting policy on a local level. I'm sure you guys have followed the events in West Dunbartonshire in Scotland.
Yep, our Kiddush at Kesher.
Yeah, where boycotting Israeli goods. There's no mention of boycotting books from Saudi Arabia. No mention of boycotting books from Gaza and Hamas, but for some reason Israel. And that's because a lot of people think that the person who's proposing that is a proper anti-Israeli bigot, and he actually he's very well affiliated with Scottish Friends of Palestine, which isn't a friend of Palestine at all. It's just, it might as well be called Scottish Friends of Anti-Israelism. And a lot of people think that, and he actually became radicalized at university. This guy who is now an MSP. A lot of people think that left-wing nutters stop being left-wing nutters when they leave university.
Is he being paid to do this? Is he being?
I don't know. I don't know. But my point is, a lot of people think that people like him, left-wing nutters, stop being left-wing nutters when they leave university. They don't. Their views are still carried, and as you've seen in Western Bartonshire, once they have power, they do try and use it for political means. And just to conclude, I think that overall better advocacy is required. I think Friends of Israel can't expect a speech or a conference to cure our problem. I think what's required is grassroots advocacy. I'm part of a group called the British Israel Coalition. I don't know if you've heard about that. We've been leading the efforts on Western Bartonshire. And basically, what we do is, if you go onto Facebook, type in British Israel Coalition, you'll get a message every Friday from us. And it'll say, right, it's a weekend, please do these 3 things. And one of the things will be, write a letter to the editor of a newspaper which gave a very anti-Israeli slant on their story. Another one will be, on Tuesday there's a talk show radio host giving a talk on Israel. Be sure to tune in, give them a phone call if you don't agree with their message. Another one would be, if you have any expertise in Israel, let us know. We can put you in contact with universities, and we can get you speaking at university. So I think it's only when you do grassroots advocacy are we going to solve this problem. And like I said, please join British Israel Coalition. And just to finish, winning doesn't mean everyone becoming pro-Israeli overnight, especially not in Britain. I think at the very least, we can say that we're winning when the point of view of Israel is at its very least considered to be a legitimate point of view in the argument. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hasan. I think you'll agree that our 2 speakers lived up and exceeded their billing, and I'd like to give you, the audience, an opportunity to address your questions, whether to Ishmael or to Hasan, and I think it's a good idea for me to get out of the way. So maybe I'll help to call on the speakers, though. Maybe I'll have one of the women first.
Thank you. First, I want to say that was very refreshing. I'm Israeli and I'm a student here in London, and most of the opinions and comments are very hostile towards our Israeli students. It's and mostly from the Palestinians, fellow students of ours. We have Middle East week in the college, so all the Arabs, mainly the Palestinians, refused to have us in the Middle East weekend.
Where do they
And-
think Israel is located? Not in the Middle East.
Exactly.
Golders Green, maybe.
I studied King's, but what I'm trying to say is that the general opinions, the general feelings of Israelis here are that mainly the Palestinians and the Arabs in general are quite hostile and quite against Israel.
Very
Excuse me?
Very hostile. That's quiet hostile.
They're very hostile.
Lashon Sadi Nahor.
I
Is it Lashon Sadi Nahor? It is in England.
And it's especially at universities rather than maybe in other places.
What do you mean by Palestinians? What are
Palestinian
students?
students that come to study here in London, from East Jerusalem, from Hebron, from all kinds of.
Do you have a question for the speakers?
So what do you think about that? Because you promote a very exactly the opposite opinion, and I want to say, what do you think about the students here that?
No, I don't represent the opposite opinion. I represent the truth, and the truth is totally different from what they say. Because everything they say and everything they try to represent is false. You heard something up in Birmingham, you mentioned? Oh, sorry, it was Leeds. I was in Leeds in January last year, a year and a half ago. And I would say about 140 people, maybe 150 people came to here, planned to come in here. And I'm arriving there with wonderful people, escorted 100 people like CST, and I'm finding outside maybe 25 people. Few of them were Arabs. I have no idea, I didn't ask them. One of them was Israeli, some were Jews, somewhere with hippie, with all of these, gadgets and everything, nickels here and rings here. What the hell is in common between them? I have no idea. I only understood they all were against me. And me not in person, me Israel. That is a big thing. That's a big problem that really is bothering in campuses. People who have no idea, not this student who had no idea what Hezbollah is and what the meaning was. People who have, okay, let's join the club, okay, against Israel. It's kind of a fashion. I really can't understand it, because if I would understand it, I will have better tools to deal with it. Look, I don't want to judge this country. I don't want to judge young generation who are very smart here. We are not speaking about plumbers or farmers. We are speaking about people who are on school, on universities. And I'm not speaking about the first year students. I'm speaking about second, third, and master's level, and PhD level, and professors. Well, there's no problems with human rights in Iran. Okay, the Middle East in their hearts. Are they doing anything against other countries? What's happening in Syria right now? Okay, or other countries in the Middle East? Only when it comes to Israel they have something to say. And believe me, just from the few trips I'm coming here, not only in those countries, let's say Scandinavia and other countries, the Arab students and maybe also the Muslim students are not the problem. Those we know that we are in conflict with them. That is fine. What for a blonde, man or woman in Hull? What brings him to think, okay, that Israel is 1, 2, 3? What brings him to stand and protest in front of Ahava store? Does he know or she knows that Ahava hires 80% of the what do you call them? Employees are Bedouins from the Negev in Yam HaMelech? They don't know. So what the hell is, there is something which is unclear for me. I agree with you that it's very very hard, very tough. Look, what I can do, I can't cheat the world. I think that, sorry?
Just have to give someone else a chance to ask.
Let's Let's take, because I have to, you know,
I know.
I have patience for you, but I have to leave also.
Stephanie?
So have 3 more questions, maybe 4 questions.
So I was.
I'm not the only speaker, by the way, remember.
Well, this is actually a question for both of you. Do you think there is any potential amongst religious Muslims to find a way to seek a sort of a rational, moderate discussion with Israel?
Look, I represent Israel. I think, you know, there is a discussion here, and we have to make. I want to be very sensitive about the status of Muslim community here, with their own country as a modern society, because they are coming from, you know, a very conservative, with a very conservative approach, and they are living in a very free society. So I have to be very sensitive. You have to make the distinction, because, you know, I don't expect them, as you mentioned before, to be or to become tomorrow morning, you know, big Zionists. I represent Israel. About Muslim community, I don't know. I mean, it's
Perhaps
you know, it's.
One of the chief reasons why we established Great Muslims for Israel was to, at the very least, create some space where Muslims can quite freely say, yes, I support Israel. I mean, saying I support Israel now is, you know, so what one of my closest friends said, you know, when I first set this up, he said, you know, you must be suicidal to say that. And so, you know, that just goes to show just what a taboo this subject is.
Sure, I appreciate the taboo, but the thing is that, I mean, you're saying you come from a secular background. I'm wondering, sort of like, do you see any chinks of light, any hope in the amongst devout Muslims for potential there to be exploited, to be developed, to be nurtured?
I think until the Israeli government really begins to strengthen its public affairs office, no, because there'll always be one dominant, strong voice, you know, spreading the lies about apartheid in Israel, etc. Until Israel actually says, no, this is not the truth. So until Israeli Hasbara gets off its feet in this country and carves the way to which people can then, you know, join this tent, this big tent, and this is what we call Israeli. No.
Wait a second. Put Israel on the side. There is another problem, that you are linking Israel to everything. You know, when they investigated, I don't know what's investigation, you know now what intelligence is, found people after 9/11. Okay, they asked them what motivated you or supporting this organization. Israel was somewhere in the last, you know, priorities. Israel wasn't like in the first because of Israel. Right now here you're telling, oh, is everything Israel? No, my friends, this is another problem that you have to deal with here. Israel is thousands of miles away from here. Israel is not the reason to ruin this country and this democracy. So leave Israel. Forget about Israel. I think this is a point that you have to understand. Okay, they will use Israel. Okay, conflict with the Palestinians. Forget. This is Bubu Mises and Edis to say. This is another story.
You're a linguist. We'll take that from Annabelle.
Hi, my name's Annabelle. Thank you very much for speaking. It was really fantastic that you have stood up and have been heard, and that's fantastic. My dilemma is really, I have an 11-year-old child. She's in a secular school, and we've chosen, and her best friend is a Muslim girl, and my daughter's Jewish. We've decided one is going to a Muslim school, and my daughter's going to a secondary Jewish school. And we're worried, how is their relationship going to withstand it? So my question really is it's not about when they get to university, they really need to be equipped at an earlier age, so that when they get to university, they're not sucked into this spiral of I don't know what JSOC's like, but sort of the Muslim side as well. And I think if people like you or other people could be recruited and go and talk to the Islamic schools, talk to the Jewish schools, I think then we would have maybe less problems further up the chain.
Can I just ask, do you know, or maybe Hasan knows, would Islamic schools in principle be sympathetic to such a speaker? Yes?
Absolutely. I am chair of the trustees of Northwest London Jewish Day School. We have linked with Ismailia and we have regular events, and you can see on the notice board of both schools boys with kippot and young girls with hijab sitting together and talking and discussing. They are in touch in writing and they are comparing their own experiences. It's got to start at a very young age. It's got to be supported by teachers, and but once you plant the seeds and it's supported by teachers, then it grows and there are lasting friendships and alliances forged, even if there are people within the organization and you have to sideline them, and there are such people in Ismailia. I don't want to mention any names, but there have been wonderful, this is less than 5 miles from here, and we have made wonderful inroads. And so far as devout Muslims are concerned, we have not achieved very much yet here. I totally agree with Hasan. But in France, where Wiesenthal is very active, and we have brought them to England, unfortunately, it is a francophone world, and they have not, most of them don't speak English, but there are quite a number, a small number, but an important number of French Muslim intellectuals who are very pro-Jewish and even pro-Israel, and they share the dialogue with people like Marc-Alain Wacnin and Bernard-Henri Lévy and such people, and there is links forged. I think we need in England a certain intellectual maturity, which isn't, there is too much sloganism, and somehow, as sorry as I am to admit it, in this the French are ahead of us.
Let me tell you one thing. I will take only two friends. I will take only 2 more questions about Israel. Not the relation between Jews and Muslims here. That is your own issue. I have nothing to do with it. Believe me. I can only tell you one thing. Look, dialogue is very important between religions and interfaith. Now, I don't want to link everything. I'm fully responsible to my words also. To link everything between the Muslim community here and Jews and whatever, but I don't want Israel to be used to political agendas, or I have no idea why. I can only tell you that a dialogue can be always you can't do Ramadan is coming, for instance, in a month and a half, something like that. Go do events together. I think the Washington Center here.
Have them for dinner.
Friends, it's not a joke. I don't want to be cynical. The Wiesenthal thing, he can be really a spearhead in this. He can't help to start a dialogue. Invite them not for dinner, for the iftar, because this is what Israel represents. It's also a Jewish value, I think. Work together. When I was in San Francisco as a consul, the first thing I did, the first big event I did, was to bring Muslim leaders and Jewish leaders into my home, my little apartment, and of course into iftar, put them on the same table and talk and speak, leave politics, because things really can't start here. So let's say 2 questions about Israel, and I will have to leave because they're waiting for me already.
Just let Daniel ask a
This is fine.
question. Take a picture.
Okay.
Everybody's talking about the Arab Spring, which is what's going on in Egypt. In your opinion, maybe you have more insider information. Do you think it is a spring, or is it a new winter, and is it going to be good for Israel? What is your opinion on what's happening now in Egypt, Tunisia?
Why do you think it have to be something to do with Israel?
Because it will.
You ask for questions about Israel.
Do you think
it have to do? You're asking.
because is it going to be a democracy coming there, which will be sympathetic to Israel, or are there going to be new Muslim states appearing, which will be against Israel?
Okay, my idea again. What's happening in the Arab world? Nothing to do with Israel. Nothing. It's internal matters. I can't tell you from what I think. What I think really, I don't think it's spring. Do you know what's spring? Arab Spring? Well, when people speaking about what's happening right now in the Arab world in the Middle East is an Arab Spring. What does it mean? that there's a new wave of, well, things are flourishing, democracies.
Where is it?
Well, what's an Arab Spring? When people mention the word, what do you think? What do you understand from that?
Democracy.
I don't think it's happening. You know why? Because speaking about a revolution, as they say, okay, democratic revolution or whatever, I don't see it this way. Because, you know, a revolution is, you know, I would say organized movement with, you know, charismatic leader with a clear agenda. Okay, we want to live like the democratic model in the United Kingdom, in you know, Sweden, in America, in Australia. But this is not, it didn't happen like that in the Arab world. Nobody also believed that, you know, and suddenly it will, you know, blow up like this. I think it was a Facebook revolution. I think that it was a Twitter revolution. Because what happened there is that young generation, in a sudden, I don't know why it happened in a sudden, like a kind of a Lego. I don't, you know, some others can find, you know, yeah, domino, Lego, you know. I know, it's amazing that I can't so in my eyes, what people wanted to achieve, first of all, is to get rid of the old regime. Wanted to get rid of the tyrannies, of the dictatorships. You try to imagine that, you know, Prime Minister here, Cameroon, will be in office for 15 years, 10 years. Would you imagine that? Is this democracy? Nobody. Well, earthquake. People will be protesting day and night. In the Arab world, they did it in a different way. So you are asking again about spring. I think it's autumn. Autumn, and autumn because things are unclear, lots of, you know, uncertainty. Because really nobody knows what's going to happen. I don't think anybody is going to happen. We in Israel asking, we want to see the Egyptians living in democracy, Syrians living in democracy, our neighbors are living in democracy. Because democratic regimes tend to understand each other more, tend to less fight with each other. Okay? So I don't, you know, in Egypt, for instance, an example, in Egypt, it's very clear because they have a more organization and they have a constitution. And the constitution says clearly that in the absence of the president, no matter what the reason is, he was killed, he died, he's sick, the military council will take over. And this is exactly what happened. Mohammed Tantawi used to be the defense secretary or minister, took over when Mubarak stepped back. Not only, and right now they are going in September, I think, or something like that, for elections. And in November they will go for a presidential election. And there they will choose, you know, the new leadership. Again, about Israel, look, you know, there are lots of essays, lots of, you know, discussions about what will happen. And if the Muslim Brotherhood, for instance, will take over. From our understanding, from what we see, again, nobody knows, nobody expected what the whole thing will happen like that. So again, you can be the best expert in the world, the best advisor in the world. You can't predict what's going to happen.
There is one place where there is a spring, and you don't know about it, and you should know about it. There is a spring. When you're finished, if you'd like to hear about it. Sorry.
We take one.
You know, the Muslim Brotherhood says clearly, and they are saying we don't have any political aspirations. I don't know. Do you believe them? I believe them. I have no idea. What they may do is they may support, you know, candidates for the parliament, exactly like Hezbollah did in Lebanon, and they can influence from behind the scenes. They said clearly for the president, president, they will support Baradi. I can tell you that the Muslim Brotherhood, I think people are making, you know, exaggerating in their power in Egypt. The young generation in Egypt, the ones who made this revolution, or whatever you want to call it, they hate to death the Muslim Brotherhood and their agenda. The Muslim Brotherhood is strong, maybe, in the poor areas, not more than that. But again, what's going to happen? I don't know what's going to happen. Look, in Libya, I have no idea what's going to happen, what can happen. Nobody knows what. So.
Do you want to call the last question?
Last question, yes. You decide. You decide.
Yeah, please. Behind Ruthie, yes.
No,
please.
I was listening to a phone-in program, and the broadcaster asked do any Arabs live in Israel, and the people who answered said definitely not. And also,
Who here in this country?
yes, and also
There are no problems. You're dealing with Israel again.
No, but I want to ask also, I'm saying, how do we educate the world? Also the media, the TV and the radio, when they, the news they give out is always so biased. That's my question.
I do agree with you. Really, from my experience and from my travels, I really do agree. Why people don't understand? They're just very smart. They don't understand enough. They don't. I mean, to tell you that I have I have a magic, let me say, formula that to how to change the world. I don't know. I have no idea. Look,
to educate.
I don't know. Listen, look, what I mean to go from school to school, I am Bedouin, I can't do it.
CNN and Fox News and BBC.
But you know what? I don't know. I really have no idea why the media, why the CNN and BBC and I don't know others are always biased against.
I try to get away with it.
I don't know.
Let me explain.
Friends, please, no. She asked me a question and I have to answer.
Because it's easier. It's better used to have blood and gore. That's much easier to have.
Friends, my mission here is to educate about Israel. We are doing the best that we can, whatever we can. I have no idea, maybe you can tell me why the media here in your own country, the people in your own country are looking about Israel and attacking Israel, not attacking Iran. Attacking Israel, not attacking Hamas and Hezbollah. Attacking Israel and attacking Libya. I have no idea. Friends, I have to leave. Thank you very much.
I'd like to give Hasan an opportunity just to respond to the question, which I think resonates with many of us. Some thoughts on how we can respond and react to the challenge of the media.
Will we be selling the book at the end of the evening?
No, his book is history. He's sold out already.
He's sold out. So will they be on his website?
Possibly.
Yes, okay, so we'll find out a way.
Well, the lady who's done that, thank you.
On a grassroots level, I think something you said about the university students, all of us who do not have university affiliations, my children tease me that if I'm on an airplane, I'm sitting next to somebody Muslim, or even somebody, just a regular Anglo person, I try to represent what I see as the truth. When I'm speaking to the lady at the Tesco checkout, I try to make a good example so that I tell them we have to start with us, little people making peace. But I'm worried about the media.
Regarding the media, really, a large portion of the blame has to go on, I'm sorry to say this, it has to go on Israel itself. I can't believe, the Israeli Hasbara in this country is not terrible. I think it's non-existent. And if it is existent, they should fire those people now. And the only reason why CNN and BBC and blogs like the Huffington Post get away with it is because I don't think Israel puts this point of view ahead enough. If I could just finish with giving a quick example. My cultural heritage is Pakistan, and right now Pakistan can just about, in the widest definition of the word, be defined as a nation state. It's breaking down, there's all sorts of horrible things going on about it. Now Pakistan has an arch enemy, India, it has China. Now the message from the Pakistani Office of Foreign Affairs is if we go down, then we'll have Al Qaeda come into Pakistan. Pakistan will turn into this massive Islamic extremist state. Terrorists will get their hands on nuclear weapons. That message resonates, and that message resonates with the media. So what Israel has to do is, take a similar point of view and say, look, you have to support Israel, not least because we have so much in common in the Western world, but also if the worst happens to us, please do not for 1 second think that the terrorists are going to stop in Israel.
Isn't there a law against biased reporting?
I don't know if there's a law against biased reporting. There is the Quango, the Independent Press Commission,
Press Complaints Commission.
Press Complaints Commission.
That's not about bias.
Right, yeah, I mean, they're absolutely useless. So I think this problem, the solution to this problem begins with effective Israeli Hasbara. Yeah.
I think that they do teach the young children in the Muslim schools here to hate Israel, to kill the Jew. They're taught from when they start schooling. It's in their psyche.
Sure,
They build up with this. It's how do you go further? How do you rub it out? How do you erase it?
But I don't know about being taught in Islamic schools. We know that most young adults become extremists at university. But look, just as the gentleman who was sitting there said, it starts from effective interfaith, by bringing out children, really intervening from a small age. And interfaith doesn't mean having a rabbi and imam, some hummus and some Dorito chips, and talking about, all the great things that we have in common. The effective interfaith is talking about the problems that divide us and creating solutions for that. You're absolutely right, you need to intervene from a young
For
age.
example, something so horrific that happened in Tamar, the slaughtering of a complete family, was not mentioned, not one time on the radio. That is so painful. And they have excuses because other things were going on. But Israel does the tiniest thing. You've got an outcry, public outcry. We are a scapegoat. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, that's right. And your point is echoed by the likes of Melanie Phillips made this point of view as well. Look, it's just the situation is really complicated, and it starts from it's not necessarily a propaganda machine, but I think that our side is the side of justice and truth, and for the side of justice and truth, we're actually pretty meek and quiet about it, and there's no reason to be so.
Yeah, Hasan, I think it's quite admirable what you're doing, and especially in the hostile environment that you do it in. I've got is, have you had any successes, and perhaps you could share one or two of those stories, because from what we see, we don't see this side of it.
Yeah, got the guy to put down the Hezbollah flag at least.
That is a success. Look, we've only been active since the start of this year, of which when I was appointed spokesperson. I think that our goal for this year at least is where other people can, to use a phrase, come out as pro-Israeli and be Muslims and Muslim and pro-Israeli, and not be, threatened or isolated or in some cases excommunicated from their community. So, look, this side, I always make the analogy that, we're not even fighting back, we're simply pushing back. Basically pushing back space that the others have occupied. And until we can make enough space where people are okay to call themselves Muslim and pro-Israeli, then at least that's progress. Regarding success, I know there's been a letter going around the internet of a Zionist Muslim who wrote a letter to the MSP of Western Bartonshire. That's been going around the British Israel Coalition. So yeah, there are some Muslims out there who do support Israel, and I think it just needs a little push on our side.
The gathering steam.
To get them out. I think it is gathering steam.
Is it going into different universities? Is your organisation?
Yeah, our campus-based initiative stands for peace. We are in 12 universities as university groups, and we're another 12 universities, but not actually affiliated. And what we do is, whenever there's a hate preacher coming, we don't say ban the hate preacher, because that will only make them look like victims. We say, okay, if a hate preacher's coming, then we'll get someone to share a platform with them and to destroy their argument. For example, in New York, there was this horrible Hamas apologist who came, and we had Douglas Murray and Ghaffar Hussain of the Quilliam Foundation, who went up to York, completely destroyed their argument, and did not let them give a 1 inch of space. And that's the way you defeat this.
I would have liked to have asked this also of Ishmael, but unfortunately there wasn't the opportunity. Nobody seems to have mentioned the British government and the fact that the British economy runs on Arab oil as a root cause in the hostility towards Israel and towards the media's take on Israel as well. And the World Service of the BBC is actually funded by the Foreign Office, and the Foreign Office, apart from being traditionally anti-Semitic, I mean, you know, the economy is very dependent on Arab oil, and in my opinion, this is the root cause of all the anti-Israel. I believe that the British public are actually brainwashed by the media to be anti-Israel, and I just wondered how you and people like Ishmael can tackle this.
Yeah, I mean, it was just a few weeks ago that I read that David Cameron had resigned as patron of the JNF, an organisation which now plants trees for peace. And for some reason, he resigned from that, which I think was a clear message to Israel, a clear message to Benjamin Netanyahu. Regarding your point on running on Arab oil, I don't know about it, but I think something that's not discussed is, a lot of people are quick to say, when we first founded, one of the smears that we got, which I expected, was, you're funded by the Israeli government. One person wrote to me and said, I know you're a Mossad agent, I've seen you on which is extraordinary. And a lot of people don't talk about the Arab lobby in this country. It's actually far much more funded, well-oiled, runs far better than the Israeli lobby in this country can. I think that's a problem, and I think we are slowly making inroads. Certain newspapers like the Telegraph, the Daily Mail, seem to be moving towards a slightly more pro-Israeli editorial stance. But this country has always harbored views against Israel. I mean, don't expect a sort of... I got this video from a friend, it was Glenn Beck from Fox News, saying, I stand with Israel. Don't expect that for another 100 years at least.
You actually made a very interesting point about JNF. From a Jewish perspective, was it a coincidence, because I don't think so, that when that organisation split amongst itself, and that was Jews against other Jews, that now the Prime Minister has turned against us. It's when we are divided against ourselves that our enemies are stronger.
Yeah, I mean,
there is that.
As a rabbi, I think you're right. I mean, I don't think Hasan will disagree, but I can definitely confirm your position.
There's just a message for Jewish unity so stark.
Something I've found is, this is an observation that I've found of the Jewish community. In many ways, like the Muslim community. The Muslim community is just as divided as the Jewish community. But I think there is this...
They're united in their hostility to Israel.
Yeah, absolutely. But there is this attitude amongst what I would call mainstream Jewish organizations of not rocking the boat. That, you don't talk about Israel, don't talk about Israeli advocacy, don't rock the boat, be home before 6. If you go anywhere, let the CST know, we've got a couple of squad cars behind you. If you want to be effective pro-Israeli advocates, that attitude needs to be thrown out the window. Just like I said, people do need to start writing to newspaper editors. They need to start calling up and talk show radio. all this sort of stuff has to begin now, because the other side is way ahead of us.
Could we just take one last question, but it's just about time. Perhaps the young lady who wants to tell us about the Arab Spring. Perhaps we'll be the last.
Yes, the spring is from Iranian opposition in exile. This is a wonderful organization with all these democratic values, and Iran is doing everything it can to destroy it. It has there was a mention of Iraq, a wonderful country. Iraq is under the thumb of Iran now, and the Iraqi Prime Minister has sent in 2,000 armed forces to murder Iranian refugees in Iraq. That's another story. I'll just tell you, I was talking to some Irish lads going on about Israel. And I listened to this for a while, and then I said to them, do you believe everything you read in the newspapers about Ireland? This, when all the troubles were. And they said no. Then I said, then why do you believe everything you read in the newspapers about Israel? It's convenient.
Very excellent coda for our discussion tonight, that there's so much that is in the press about Israel which is whether biased or ill-informed or simply willfully hostile. And I'm delighted to again just conclude by welcoming all of you and to say I think we've had a very stimulating and informative program together. I want to thank Hasan and Ishmael in his absence and to thank our good friend Graham as well for making it possible.